Hey guys, what's up? It's Matt86, and I'm going to be taking a look at Retrobit's Legacy 16. If you don't know what this is, it is a wireless 2.4 GHz controller, so it requires a dongle, and it does come with two dongles. One that's USB Type A for like a PC and PC gaming experience, or if you're gaming on something like a RetroPie. But it also, and this is probably the biggest thing that's important to know about it, comes with a 2.4 GHz dongle attachment that is compatible with the SNES. Now, if I compare this side by side with my 8-bit Do ones, I am not necessarily as fond of the Retrobit controller. Now, I know a lot of people like to say 8-bit Do, and I get that. It totally makes sense, Nintendo, 8-bit Do, but ever since I heard this on their very own product,
8-bit Do.
I have called them 8-bit Do, and that's how I say it, so if that's divisive to you, I'm so sorry. Not really, that's kind of sarcastic. The Legacy 16 just doesn't feel like it's up to the same kind of quality as the 8-bit Do one. All the buttons on the Retrobit controller are extra mushy feeling, and I don't really like that. Also, they're kind of like turbo home buttons that are located above the start and select buttons. I had become really accustomed to this on the 8-bit Do controllers being located below my thumbs where like kind of B and A are or the D-pad are, and that was always a little more comfortable. That's more of a preference thing though, not a fair thing to really say, oh, this one does it wrong, it just does it differently. But I really just can't get past the mush of the buttons. And it's also worth noting that the analog sticks on the Retrobit Legacy 16, they're smaller feeling, they feel a little over tightened for lack of a better word, I guess, and I just don't like that. Now, one weird thing I did notice with the analog controllers is that with the 8-bit Do controller, on the bottom there's kind of this protrusion underneath each one of them, where I found that my middle fingers were kind of gripping the controller, so when I was using them, it was sort of stabilized. Now, that's missing here is the bottom of the Retrobit controller, and this again is probably a weird thing to point out, but it's something I noticed. On the bottom of the Retrobit controller is completely flat, so I find that I have less control in my hands with the controller if you're doing a lot of moving, if you're over-exaggerating your movements at that it doesn't seem like you can get as good of a grip on the Retrobit Legacy 16 controller. On the top of the controller, you do have your L1 and L2, R1 and R2 buttons, just like you do on the 8-bit Do one. You have X, Y, B, and A. You have your D-pad. You have your turbo, home, whatever you decide to assign those buttons to. Like usually in RetroPie, I'll assign one to kind of be the command code to get me back to the emulation station. When you're holding the controller, it does feel a little bit awkward. It doesn't feel like I'm holding an SNES controller. It doesn't feel like the 8-bit Do controller. It just kind of feels a little bit lacking. The biggest thing again though that it has going for it is the ability to just plug into the SNES and be a wireless controller for it. So it comes with that, and if that's some simple solution, one-stop shop for you, there it is. Now, it's not to say that the controller's bad. It's alright, it works. I have no issues with any kind of drifting. It feels fine. I'm able to play the games fine with it. But I suppose when it comes to preference and when I really stop and think about it, it just doesn't really feel like it ticks the boxes. Now, if you're watching this specifically because you're curious if it's compatible with things like the Nintendo Switch, yes, it is compatible with the Nintendo Switch as well, if that's the route you want to go. If you want to swap between your old SNES that you want to play and retro relive and relove, then you can swap to the Switch and play it on there as well. It is pre-programmed with a couple functions so that you can swap around different macros. They have preset on the controller as well. For instance, swapping between D input and X input, this is all included in your manual, so you should keep it to reference it. You can also do things like swap the buttons, A and B buttons, with the X and Y buttons for some of those games that may require you to have that for the better feel of the retro experience, or just personal preference. But as you can see here in this shot, this is the manual and some of the pre-programmed macros and how to swap between them. Battery life is pretty good, charge time is pretty low, so it doesn't take too long to charge it. I plug it in, maybe takes 30 minutes to an hour before I can get a satisfactory amount of playtime out of it, so really not that long. Optimal charge time that's recommended is 2 to 3 hours, but like I said, 30 minutes to an hour, and I feel like it's pretty much fully charged and everything's good to go. And I haven't had a session where I ran out of battery while playing with it. It's also worth noting that it does charge over USB Type-C, and they've left the old micro USB on the SNES dongle that you plug into the SNES so that you can plug right from controller to that, but it is not compatible with this specific cable that comes with it now, as it is USB Type-C. And just to quickly recap, it's not a bad controller, but if you're comparing it to something like the SNES Classic controller or the original SNES controller, it's just got this feel that just doesn't feel right enough in my hands anyways of using it. The SNES was one of my favorite consoles, and I feel like there was a lot of opportunity here that perhaps just didn't work for me. The overly mushy buttons, that's the biggest thing. Like, I just have a really hard time when you got something that offers that satisfying click, depression to actuation, that real sort of firm controller feel, to go into this where you just feel like you're just mushing in these rubber dome caps. I don't like that personally, but no complaints of its responsiveness and how it plays. Personally, one of the biggest drawbacks is going to be the fact that there's no rumble. If you're looking to play games where you experience any kind of force feedback via rumble, it's just not here. You know, one of the best things it really does have going for it, though, is just how simplistic it is to set it up and use it. Connecting it and just being able to play it. Plug in the dongle, connect the controller to it, figure out which input you need, whether it's X input, D input, and just be able to go. And that is really one of the highlights I would have to say about this controller. It's just super easy to set it up, super easy to use it, and very much an overall enjoyable experience despite the mushy buttons. Anyways, guys, I hope it was somewhat helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video I do. You guys have a great day, night, whatever it is.